The Omega Sector had long been a place of mystery and terror, a region of space where fleets had disappeared without a trace and no empire dared to claim it. The Galactic Council had sealed it off centuries ago, marking it as a dead zone where even the most advanced species feared to go. But now, something was entering the forbidden space, something that had never been seen before. Alarms flared across Trelvan outposts stationed at the edge of the sector, their sensors detecting a warship moving into the restricted zone. It was not an ordinary vessel, nor did it belong to any of the great galactic powers. The ship bore a name that sent a ripple of unease through the command centers of every empire that received the alert. HSES. Nemesis. A human warship. The mere thought of it sent a shudder through the ranks of the Trelvan military, for humans had always been an unpredictable force in the galaxy. They were far younger than most species, having arrived on the interstellar stage only a few centuries ago, yet they had defied logic and expectation at every turn. They had no vast empire, no great colonies stretching across the stars, yet they had never lost a war. And now, one of their ships, a lone vessel, was venturing where no empire dared to go. Grand Strategist Vecthar of the Trelvan Empire stood before the massive holographic display in the war room of his flagship, staring at the image of the incoming warship. It was unlike anything his kind had ever seen. Sleek, black, and streamlined, the Nemesis radiated an energy signature that made no sense. Its power output was impossibly high for a ship of its size. Its hull reflected no standard readings, and its drive system left no clear trail. It was as if the ship was operating under a completely different set of rules. He clenched his claws, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. Humans were reckless, but they were not suicidal. They did nothing without a plan. He turned to his officers, their reptilian faces tense with uncertainty. "How many ships do we have in range?" His voice was sharp, commanding, leaving no room for hesitation. A tactical officer quickly responded, his fingers racing over the controls. 30 warships within immediate range, Grand Strategist. Another 20 can arrive within the hour. Vecthar's mind worked quickly. One ship. 50 of ours. And yet, why do I feel uneasy? His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Humans were a species that had defied expectations too many times. He had read the reports from past conflicts, the stories of how humans had survived wars against stronger enemies. They were resourceful, unpredictable, and most of all, they never entered a battlefield unprepared. He turned his gaze back to the hologram, his expression dark. "Send a message. Inform them they are violating council law and must retreat immediately. If they do not comply, we will destroy them." The message was sent across subspace instantly, but there was no reply. The Nemesis did not respond. It did not slow down. It did not change course. It continued forward, slipping deeper into the Omega Sector like a shadow moving through the void. The silence only deepened the unease spreading through the Trelvan ranks. They had expected arrogance from the humans, expected defiance, but this was something else. This was a silence that spoke louder than threats. It was a silence that made even the most battle-hardened commanders feel something close to fear. Vecthar's claws tapped against the control panel as he considered his next move. "Lock onto them," he ordered. "If they take another step forward, fire a warning shot." He needed to know if the humans were truly mad enough to challenge them alone. His fleet was ready, weapons primed, and yet, for the first time in his long military career, he felt uncertain. The moment stretched, tension rising like a storm about to break. The human ship continued its advance, slipping further into the zone, ignoring the invisible line that no empire had dared to cross. Vecthar gave the order. "Fire!" A bright lance of plasma energy shot across the void, aimed just ahead of the Nemesis, a warning that could not be ignored. The shot was perfect, designed to force a response. But then, something happened that made every officer on the Trelvan command deck freeze. The Nemesis vanished. It did not dodge. It did not deflect the attack. It did not activate shields. It simply disappeared. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. The sensors went wild, trying to locate the ship, but there was nothing. No trace. No energy signature. Nothing. It was as if the warship had never existed. Confusion spread across the Trelvan fleet, officers scrambling to find an explanation. Where did it go? One of the junior commanders gasped, his voice breaking the stunned silence. Vector's grip tightened. This was not normal. Cloaking technology existed, but not like this. Even the most advanced stealth systems left behind distortions, energy trails, something that could be traced. But the Nemesis had left behind nothing. It was as if it had stepped outside reality itself. And then, before anyone could react, something even more terrifying happened. The Nemesis reappeared inside their fleet. It was no longer at the edge of the zone. It was behind them. It had moved in a way that no ship should have been able to. The implications were horrifying. This was not just a cloaking device. It was something else, something beyond what any known technology could achieve. And before the Trelvans could react, before they could even process what had just happened, a massive explosion ripped through one of their battleships. The Nemesis had fired without warning, a single precise shot that bypassed shields and struck directly into the enemy ship's core. The battleship erupted in a fireball of energy, debris scattering in all directions. Panic spread. Trelvan officers shouted over one another, scrambling to understand what was happening. "Impossible!" one of them cried. "How did they just destroyed a battleship with one shot?" "That's not possible." Vekthar's blood ran cold. One ship. One shot. One kill. He stared at the hologram, watching as the Nemesis moved like a phantom, untouched, unreadable, unstoppable. His fleet outnumbered them 50-1, but for the first time, he was starting to wonder if it mattered. The humans had sent a message without words, without threats. They'd stepped into the Forbidden Zone alone, not because they were reckless, but because they had already won. A voice broke through the chaos, calm and unwavering. The transmission had no request, no warning, no arrogance. It was a simple declaration, but it carried the weight of inevitability. The humans are here. Vekthar clenched his fists. He had planned to destroy them. But now, for the first time in his life, he wondered if they were the ones about to be destroyed. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard in the making. The Nemesis drifted through the Trelvan fleet like a predator in the dark, unseen and untouchable. The Trelvan warships, once confident in their overwhelming numbers, were now scrambling, their movements uncoordinated, their weapons firing blindly into empty space. It was a desperate attempt to hit something they could no longer track. The Nemesis had become a ghost, an invisible force striking without warning and vanishing before they could react. Grand Strategist Vekthar stood rigid in his command center, his reptilian eyes locked onto the chaos unfolding on the holographic display before him. His fleet, once an unstoppable armada, was now disoriented and leaderless. Every attempt to regain control was met with another devastating strike. A Trelvan destroyer exploded in a silent burst of fire, its hull splitting apart as if it had been sliced open by an invisible blade. Another ship lost power entirely, drifting helplessly as its systems failed one by one. The Nemesis wasn't simply attacking, it was dismantling them, taking apart the fleet ship by ship, as if it had already predicted every move they would make. Vekthar clenched his jaw, forcing down the cold dread creeping into his mind. He needed to think, needed to act before his entire fleet was reduced to wreckage. But how could he fight an enemy he couldn't even see? On board the Nemesis, Captain Elias Carter watched the battle unfold with calculated precision. His crew moved with quiet efficiency, their expressions unreadable, their actions methodical. There was no chaos here, no panic, only the steady rhythm of a well-planned execution. The Trelvans had expected a traditional fight, a clash of warships, brute force against brute force. But the Nemesis did not engage in traditional warfare. It did not need to. "They are scattering," the tactical officer reported, his voice calm, almost detached. "Their formation is collapsing." Carter gave a small nod, his gaze never leaving the main display. "Good," he said. "Keep them off balance. They're not afraid yet, not truly. But they will be. His words were not spoken with arrogance, nor with cruelty. It was simply a statement of fact. Fear was a weapon just as powerful as any cannon, and the Nemesis wielded it with precision. Another Trelvan battleship detonated, sending debris tumbling through the void. The enemy fleet was breaking apart, their disciplined lines reduced to scattered clusters of confused warships. And yet, despite their losses, they still clung to the belief that they could fight back. A squadron of Trelvan cruisers locked onto what they believed was the Nemesis's last known position and unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, their weapons cutting through the darkness in bright, blinding arcs. But they were shooting at nothing. The Nemesis had already moved, slipping through their defenses like a shadow. In the next instant, one of the cruisers convulsed violently before erupting in a fireball. The others barely had time to react before their sensors were overloaded with static, their systems failing in rapid succession. They had lost the ability to fight before they had even realized they were under attack. Vekthar's hands curled into fists as he watched his forces crumble. This was impossible. It was unthinkable. No ship, no matter how advanced, should have been able to do this. The Trelvan Empire had ruled this sector for centuries, had fought and crushed countless enemies. And yet here they were, being undone by a single vessel. A ship that should not have had the firepower, should not have had the technology, should not have had the knowledge to fight like this. And that was what terrified him the most. The humans were not just outgunning them. They were outthinking them. Every maneuver the Trelvans made, every desperate strategy they attempted, had already been countered before it had even been executed. It was as if the Nemesis could see into the future, predicting their every move with ruthless precision. Vekthar's claws dug into the metal surface of his console. He had underestimated them. The entire empire had. And now they were paying the price. A new alert flashed across the war room, a direct transmission from the Nemesis. The officers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances, before finally patching it through. The screen flickered to life, revealing Captain Elias Carter standing calmly on the bridge of his warship. His expression was unreadable, his posture relaxed. But there was an undeniable weight behind his gaze, a presence that made even the hardened Trelvan warriors shift uneasily. Carter did not speak immediately. He simply watched them, as if giving them a moment to comprehend the reality of their situation. And then, in a voice that carried no anger, no threat, but an undeniable certainty, he said, "This battle is already over." The words sent a chill through the room. They were not spoken with arrogance or mockery. They were spoken as a fact as inevitable as the cold void of space. Vekthar's jaw tightened. He had never heard a human speak like that before. Not with desperation, not with fury, but with complete and absolute control. Carter continued, his voice steady. "We didn't come here to start a war, but we will end one, if necessary." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only silence behind. And in that silence, Vekthar realized something that shook him to his core. The humans had not fired a single unnecessary shot. Every attack had been precise, calculated, designed to neutralize rather than destroy. If the Nemesis had wanted to wipe out his entire fleet, it could have done so already. For the first time in his long career, Vekthar felt something he had never truly felt before. It was not just fear. It was something deeper, something worse: powerlessness. The battle was over. The humans had won, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Silence fell over the battlefield, but it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence before the next strike. The Nemesis remained motionless, drifting like a specter among the wreckage of destroyed Trelvan ships. The once mighty fleet had been reduced to a scattering of damaged and terrified warships, their formations broken, their leaders uncertain. And yet, Grand Strategist Vekthar did not order a retreat. He stood on the command deck of his heavily armed flagship, his sharp reptilian eyes narrowed in focus. The fear that had gripped him moments ago was still there, but now it burned beneath something stronger: determination. The humans had outmaneuvered them, outgunned them, and humiliated them, but they had made one mistake. They had assumed the battle was already won. Vekthar's claws tightened around the console as he activated a hidden frequency. "Now!" he commanded, his voice sharp and filled with restrained fury. A ripple passed through space. In an instant, 10 massive Trelvan dreadnoughts emerged from the void, their colossal forms dropping out of warp at the edges of the battlefield. Each one was a fortress in itself, bristling with weapons, shields reinforced to withstand the most devastating firepower. They had remained hidden until this moment, their energy signatures masked by experimental stealth technology. It had been a desperate gamble, one Vecthar had not expected to use, but now it was his only chance. The Nemesis had been unstoppable so far, but even it could not fight a fully prepared Trelvan execution fleet. The trap had been set long before the humans had even arrived. The Omega Sector had always been a forbidden zone, but not just because of ancient superstition. It was a testing ground, a place where the Trelvans had been developing new weapons in secret. And now, those weapons were aimed directly at the Nemesis. The human warship did not move immediately. It remained eerily still, as if assessing the new threat. Vecthar watched the display carefully, waiting for the humans to make their next move. The dreadnoughts had already begun charging their primary cannons, massive energy projectiles that could tear through entire fleets. Unlike the scattered ships that had fallen earlier, these vessels were designed to counter threats like the Nemesis. Their armor could withstand even the most devastating of human weapons, and their targeting systems had been reprogrammed to track energy anomalies, including whatever strange technology the humans were using to disappear. The trap was perfect. No matter how fast, no matter how unpredictable, the Nemesis would not escape this time. And yet, something felt wrong. The human ship remained unnervingly still. It did not power its weapons, did not attempt to flee. It simply waited. And then, just as Vecthar was about to give the order to fire, something changed. The Nemesis's energy signature spiked, but not in the way of a ship charging weapons. The readings made no sense. The energy levels fluctuated, warping the very fabric of space around it. And then, without warning, the Nemesis was gone. Not in the way it had disappeared before. This time, it was not cloaking itself, not slipping through gaps in their sensors. It had vanished entirely. There was no trace, no lingering distortions, no residual energy patterns. Panic surged through the Trelvan fleet. Officers scrambled to adjust their scanners, trying to find the warship, but there was nothing. Vecthar's jaw tightened, his claws tapping against the console as his mind raced. "Impossible," one of his subordinates muttered. It was right there. How could it? The strategist silenced him with a sharp glare. He refused to believe in ghosts. There was an explanation. There had to be. The humans were playing another trick, using some new technology to mask their ship. But even as he reassured himself, doubt clawed at the edges of his thoughts. If the Nemesis had escaped their trap, then that meant an explosion rocked the battlefield. One of the dreadnoughts lurched violently, its hull splitting apart as a blinding lance of energy carved through it like a knife through flesh. Then another. And another. One by one, the massive warships began to fall, obliterated before they could even mount a defense. But the Nemesis was still nowhere to be seen. It was striking from nowhere, attacking from angles that made no logical sense. Vecthar's scales bristled as a cold realization settled over him. The trap had not been for the Nemesis. The trap had been for them. The humans had known about the hidden fleet. They had expected this. They had let the Trelvans think they had the advantage, had let them believe they had sprung a perfect ambush. And then, in the moment of victory, the Nemesis had turned the trap against them. His officers were shouting now, screaming for orders, for escape routes, for anything that could stop the slaughter. But Vecthar knew it was too late. They had lost the moment the humans had decided to enter the Forbidden Zone. The moment they had dared to challenge the unknown. He clenched his fists as his flagship shook from another explosion. The Trelvan Empire had always believed itself to be the dominant force of this sector. But today, they had learned a terrible truth. The humans were something else entirely. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard of fire and debris. The mighty Trelvan execution fleet, once believed to be the ultimate weapon of the Empire, had been reduced to burning wreckage. The Nemesis had not just evaded their trap, It had turned the entire battle into a lesson, a demonstration of just how powerless the Trelvans truly were against human warfare. Grand Strategist Vekthar stood frozen on the bridge of his damaged flagship, his mind struggling to process the horror unfolding before him. His dreadnought, the unyielding Wrath, was one of the last operational ships left, but it was no longer a symbol of strength. It was prey-hunted, cornered, and defenseless. Around him, his officers shouted in desperation, trying to establish communications, searching for survivors, begging for orders. But Vekthar had none to give. He had fought countless wars, crushed rebellions, annihilated enemies that dared to challenge the Empire, but he had never encountered an enemy like this. The Nemesis was not just a warship. It was something far worse. It was a warning. The communication systems flickered to life. Every remaining Trelvan ship received the same incoming transmission. The humans were finally speaking. The holographic display on Vekthar's bridge shimmered, and Captain Elias Carter appeared, his expression calm, his uniform pristine, as if he had not just commanded one of the most devastating military victories in galactic history. His gaze was not filled with arrogance or cruelty, but with something far more unsettling certainty. He knew how this battle would end. He had known before it even began. And now, he was here to deliver the final words that would decide the fate of the Trelvan fleet. "This is Captain Elias Carter of the Nemesis," he said, his voice steady, devoid of unnecessary threats. "Grand Strategist Vekthar, your fleet is finished. Your empire sent you here to destroy us, to eliminate what you believed was a single human warship trespassing in forbidden space. But now you know the truth. We did not come here to fight you. We came here to end this war before it begins." Vekthar felt a chill crawl down his spine. There was no pride in the human captain's voice, no celebration of victory, only control. This was not a negotiation. This was an ultimatum, Carter continued, his voice unwavering. The Trelvan Empire believes itself to be the dominant force of this sector. You have ruled through fear, through conquest, through the belief that no one can challenge you. But that belief is a lie. Your fleet was supposed to be invincible. It was supposed to be the executioner of any who opposed you. And yet, today, you have seen what a single human warship is capable of. He let the words sink in for a moment before speaking again, his tone growing even sharper. The question you must ask yourself now is this: what happens when there is more than one? A heavy silence filled the bridge. Vekthar's heart pounded in his chest. He had assumed the Nemesis was an anomaly, a secret weapon, an experiment. But the way Carter spoke, with such confidence, such certainty, it suggested something far more terrifying. What if this warship was not unique? What if the humans had dozens? Hundreds? The thought was unthinkable. "We are offering you a choice," Carter continued. "You can retreat. You can return to your empire and tell them the truth that the humans are not to be challenged. That we are not weak. That we are not prey." His voice lowered slightly, but the weight of his words only grew heavier. "Or you can stay. You can fight. And you will die." The unyielding Wrath trembled as another explosion rocked a distant Trelvan vessel. The last of the fleet was falling. Soon, there would be nothing left but wreckage. Vekthar looked at the faces of his officers. Some were filled with fear, others with anger, but all of them understood the same truth. There was no victory here. There was no counterattack that could change the outcome. The humans had already won. Vekthar exhaled slowly, forcing down his pride, his fury, his disbelief. He had always believed the Trelvan Empire was unbreakable, that no force in the galaxy could challenge it. But the humans had shattered that belief in a single battle. He turned to his communications officer, his voice heavy with reluctant defeat. "Order the retreat," he said. Now, the order was sent. The remaining Trelvan ships, those that still had functional engines, began disengaging from the battlefield, their weapons powering down. They did not flee like cowards, nor did they run in panic. They retreated in surrender, because they now understood a truth that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The humans were not weak. They were not primitive. They were something far more dangerous. As the last of the Trelvan ships vanished into the void, the Nemesis remained silent and motionless, watching. It did not pursue. It did not fire upon the retreating vessels. It had made its point. The war was over before it had even begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Nemesis drifted silently in the vast darkness of space, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been the mighty Trelvan execution fleet. The battle was over. The last of the enemy warships had retreated, and yet the void still carried the weight of something unfinished, a warning unspoken, a storm waiting to rise. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the holographic display before him. The destruction was absolute, a testament to what humanity was capable of. But Carter did not feel triumph. There was no victory to celebrate here, only a message that had been sent loud and clear. The Trelvan Empire had been humbled, but that did not mean they had been defeated. Deep in the heart of Trelvan space, Grand Strategist Vekthar sat in the dimly lit war chamber of the Imperial Palace, his scaled hands clenched into fists as he replayed the battle's final moments. The Nemesis had been a nightmare, an impossibility, a thing that should not exist. And yet, it did. He had spent his entire life believing in the supremacy of his empire, convinced that no species could ever rise to challenge their rule. But now, that belief had been shattered. The humans had shown their strength, their technology, their power, but more than that, they had shown their restraint. They could have destroyed the entire fleet, wiped them out without hesitation. But they hadn't. They had let them live. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Vekthar turned his gaze toward the towering figure standing before him, Emperor Zorvul, the ruler of the Trelvan Empire. The Emperor's crimson eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill through the room. He had watched the battle unfold through secure transmissions, had seen his unstoppable fleet be reduced to nothing by a single human warship. And now he waited for his strategist to explain why. "Tell me," the Emperor's voice rumbled, slow and deliberate. "Tell me how we were defeated." Vekthar hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We were not prepared," he admitted, his voice strained. "We underestimated them. The Nemesis is not just a warship. It is a statement, a warning. The humans allowed us to escape because they want us to spread that warning. They want us to fear them." He exhaled, his claws tapping against the cold metal table. "And we should." The Emperor remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. "You believe they could destroy us?" Vekthar did not answer immediately. His pride, his loyalty to the Empire, demanded that he deny it. But the strategist within him, the part of him that had seen the truth firsthand, knew better. "If one ship can do this," he said carefully, "imagine what an entire fleet could do." The Emperor's claws flexed against the armrest of his throne. "And yet, they did not destroy us." "No," Vekthar admitted. "They didn't." He met the Emperor's gaze, his expression grim. "Because they don't need to. They already won." The weight of those words settled over the chamber like a suffocating force. The Empire had always ruled through dominance, through the belief that they were unstoppable. But the humans had shattered that illusion without even firing a final shot. And now, the question remained, what would the Empire do next? Back aboard the Nemesis, Carter stood in silence as his officers worked around him, monitoring long-range scans, analyzing data, preparing for the next move. The ship had fulfilled its purpose, but the mission was far from over. Humanity had sent its warning, but whether the Trelvans would listen was another matter entirely. Carter knew how empires worked. The wounded pride of a powerful enemy was more dangerous than any fleet. And the Trelvans were not the kind to accept weakness. They would plan, they would scheme, and one day they would return. Commander Sarah Monroe approached, her expression unreadable. "Do you think they got the message?" she asked, her voice quiet. Carter didn't answer right away. He stared at the wreckage outside, at the floating remains of what had once been the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. And yet, he knew this was not the end. The war had not begun today, but neither had peace. The galaxy had changed, and the humans had shown their hand. There would be no going back. "They got the message," he finally said, his voice firm. "The question is, what will they do with it?" Silence filled the bridge once more. The Nemesis remained in the void, watching, waiting. Somewhere in the vast darkness, the Trelvans were doing the same. The battle was over, but the war had just begun.